Hello, and welcome to the Middle East Forum Speaker Webinar Series and Podcast. I'm Stacey Roman, and I will be moderating this discussion today. We are pleased to have Professor Pinar Tremblay, a lecturer at Cal Poly Pomona Department of Political Science and regular contributor for Al Monitor and other publications on Turkey, join us to discuss Understanding Erdogan's Victory. Professor Tremblay will speak for 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. Please note the video will not be on for this webinar. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Professor Pinar Tremblay.
Thank you, Stacey. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. So I put a couple of titles for my speech, and then I was running it by my son, and he picked the election that wasn't. So today we'll be talking about the parliamentary and presidential elections in Turkey that was held in May. And we all know how the story ends. So allow me to take you a bit on a historic journey with a brief comparison from the 20th century of two charismatic leaders. Those of you that are studying Middle Eastern European politics know these two men very well and these two instances, but I think this sharp contrast is really important to follow through the rest of the discussions. So our first charismatic leader is the British Prime Minister Churchill, who led Britain through the darkest hour in World War II into victory. And just as the peace talks were going on, he lost the 1945 election. British people decided to choose a new leader for a new era to make peace and generate prosperity. So there was a landslide victory for Labour and a horrid loss for Churchill and the Conservatives. Now, we fast forward to 1967, Egypt, another charismatic leader, President Nasser, who loses the Six-Day War. It's a very humiliating defeat, and he resigns, just to be reinstated in a couple of days by demonstrations calling for him, crying for him to stay. These are two nations making choices about their executive powers. And we must question, why would one of them want to hold on to their defeated leader, who is somehow ready to go, while another would decide to replace their successful, victorious leader? I think this comparison is important because I'm one of the few people that are studying Turkey that actually bases their analysis on the fact that Turkey is an authoritarian regime. In the last 6-7 years, I have been repeating this statement and facing quite a bit of criticism from my colleagues, friends, and mostly people from Turkey and studying Turkey. They prefer to use the following words to describe Turkey: slithering away from democracy, for example, or one that's losing its democratic credentials, one struggling to remain a democracy, or if one is much more willing to explain it, they would say a competitive authoritarian system. I think the assumptions that we make before we start our analysis significantly affects our results. So authoritarianism in Turkey is not the same as Hungary or India or Russia, Iran, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the list goes on. These are all different in their own ways, but there are three interrelated features that make populist authoritarian regimes what they are. So these are the criteria that apply for Turkey and for other countries as well. Number one, power does not change hands peacefully. And the statement that authoritarian regimes are resilient, not, authoritarianism 101. Number two, dissent is suppressed. This can be done in a variety of methods in different countries, but the end result is always the same. Dissent is silenced. And the last one is dictatorships grab more power as anti-intellectualism spreads in the country. All authoritarian regimes at their core are anti-intellectual. Now, in Turkey, we have 21-year-old AKP government, Justice and Development Party, which Erdogan, Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, Turkish president, leads. And this government has generated rather negative returns on almost all fields. Human rights, women's rights, LGBTQI plus rights, education, environmental issues, employment, foreign policy, justice system, they're all suffering, and the list can be made longer. If you don't, you have very little time, you could just Google women's murders, femicide in Turkey, and the rates have been skyrocketed. So there is significant struggle about the services that the state provides and the services that the state fails to provide. For those who assume Turkey is a struggling democracy, there were mainly three reasons for Erdogan to lose. One is the economy. All the economic indicators were signaling growing troubles, and they still do. Two is the opposition somehow was finally united to stand up against Erdogan. And the last one was unexpected in February. East of Turkey and northern Syria experienced a horrible earthquake. So many scholars and pundits assume that this kind of an earthquake would actually help the discontent to grow. So the frequent joke among opposition groups was that if I hang my jacket as a candidate against Erdogan, my jacket would win. So this was, of course, before May. It's in a Turkish sarcasm. This is to say that Erdogan is going to lose whatever happens in May. There's no way he can win. And opposition, we also need to note, that has been calling for very passionately for early elections since 2018. So every 5 years, these elections are expected to happen in the new presidential system. And the opposition was very adamant, very passionate, calling for an early election. We all now understand that they were far from ready. So Erdogan did not lose. And actually, the opposition lost significantly. What I mean by that is now the Turkish parliament, however its powers are decimated, Erdogan still uses it to legitimize his actions, is now more conservative and more right-wing than it has ever been. This is no longer can be explained just by the fact that Erdogan won significant amount of votes. To the contrary, we see that the coalition against Erdogan was formed by giving a lot of compromises, by making a lot of compromises for the former AKP members, for former friends and allies of Erdogan. So all of these right-wing people are now in the parliament, are in the Turkish parliament, and there is a very good probability in the when the new legislative times start in the fall, they are going to be voting in line with Erdogan, not against Erdogan. So I think that harsh reality is always better than false hope for accurate analysis. So it is the cost of trying to generate a unified opposition actually backfired. And these lawmakers have already separated from the main opposition party that they entered the elections for, and people that were rooting for the opposition voted for them unwillingly, but they were told this is pretty much the only way. So when I say a corrupt opposition, another must-have for authoritarian regimes, this is what I mean. In authoritarian regimes, oppositions willingly or unwillingly work for the benefit of the incumbent, hence making the term of the incumbent for life almost. So there's also the argument that if Erdogan is a dictator, why would he even hold elections? So Erdogan has set up a system because of his populist standpoint. Elections are essential to him to periodically reclaim his legitimacy and to restructure and solidify his base. Because in Turkey, in the last decade or so, political thinking has become rather binary. And I'll be explaining this in a moment about polarization. So if one wins the election, one becomes the will of the people, not the representative necessarily, but the will itself, which cannot be questioned. So if you press this for logic, there is the Islamic idea that comes to their rescue. The idea goes as such: those of us that are elected to the top are also protected by this invisible shield, that we are only accountable to God. And if we are to be questioned, it could only be after death by God. So there's really not much you can do against a mindset like this. So the bad government's impact on election results, not as much as we had predicted. The most important reason, as I just mentioned, is polarization, which follows populism. You either belong to Erdogan group or the anti-Erdogan club. You're either with the masses, the good people, the believers, or with the corrupt elites. Erdogan, of course, represents the good people of Turkey, the true believers, and those who are good because they agree with Erdogan all the time. So in a healthy democracy, constituents will have the right to agree with some of the policies and then criticize some others. But the polarization generates such a mindset that you don't criticize whatever the leader says, you're constantly clapping. So going through this extremely well-filtered and government-controlled media, the reality of the facts are kind of lost on everyone studying Turkey, living in Turkey, trying to survive Turkish politics. So it really doesn't matter what Erdogan says, and he can flip-flop anytime. The idea is that there will always be people clapping for him. So, for example, economy is bad, but most people experience their fridge is not full. They are not able to buy the basic goods that they were able to do a year ago. However, they don't know who to hold responsible for. So the link of forming the perception of responsibility, that connection is lost. Economy is mismanaged. Who is responsible? There is no government accountability. And this lack of accountability is due to the fact that public does not hold Erdogan and his government accountable. If there are natural disasters, it's a wish of God. If the economy is mismanaged, that's due to foreign enemies or internal dissidents. And Erdogan should be always supported. So if you accept Turkey as an authoritarian regime, you would also see that economic development does not help if you'd like to monopolize power. Rather, economic development is a threat to autocrats because it generates the spread of independent sources of commercial and political power. Except for the oil gas-rich GCC countries, we don't see wealthy, developed countries that are dictatorships. So the idea that bad economy would topple Erdogan regime did not hold, because economic development is more likely to lead to democratic change from an authoritarian system. But since most of the scholars, pundits assume Turkey to be still a democracy, this leads to, again, false hope and wrong assumptions leading to wrong consequences. So we are dealing with a corrupt opposition, an electorate that's not able to generate the connections of reality. We're also not able to get accurate information from the government on the basic facts. For example, what is the inflation rate? What the government tells us versus what the receipts show that from your own personal shopping don't add up. Opposition groups also are in the dark, so they cannot really provide credible policy proposals. And the crony service system is also generated. So if there is a position, government position, 10 people hired to do the job of 3, and out of that 10, only 1 of them actually know what the job requires. The rest are just ATM employees. What we are seeing is a group of opposition, a very strong opposition, trying to generate change, working very hard, kind of like hamsters in a spinning wheel. The end result, unfortunately, is the continuation of the same system. So false hope before the election, getting us all hyped up, and a deep mental crush of disappointment post-election. And That's just what it is. So my argument is that if we want anything to change in Turkey, we do need to make our assumptions before we start analyzing the country properly. And then maybe we can actually ask for change, because authoritarian regimes do cause trouble for their environments. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Daniel Pipes states, thank you for the excellent presentation. Can you please provide details on the extent of election manipulation in the voting last month?
Yes, so thank you, Daniel. There were two elections held 2 weeks apart. The first election was for the parliament and the president, and the presidential election did not. So the rule is, the new rule in the new presidential system, this is the second election of that, is that there should be a simple majority. The winner needs 50% plus one. And in the first round, nobody was able to get through that. So the first manipulation was done through what we call the corrupt opposition, or the spoiler effect. So the government supported two figures to enter into the race, along with Erdogan and the main opposition candidate. And so there were 4 candidates running in the first round. One of them dropped about a week before the election, but at that point, all the ballots were posted, so his picture, his place was already there. Some people did vote for him, some people didn't know, I guess he quit, whatnot. So the spoiler effect worked in that sense. In the second round, Erdogan won the majority, and that was held 2 weeks apart. Now, there are a lot of rumors about what had happened. I don't want to dwell too much on them, but I'll tell you basically what we are facing. The government has apparently generated what we call fake identities. So they have registered the same person under different names in multiple places. They have also managed to change votes. So there were ballot boxes where people have said they voted for themselves because they are the candidate, and their family have voted for them, apparently. And the end result in that ballot box was there was no votes for him. So people were saying, where is my vote? I voted for myself. Where is my vote? So the problem is the opposition did not say anything about this. So it's, I'm not able to generate proof that some sort of rigging happened. But this time, every time they come up with some new methodology, new techniques to get the results that they want. I think the strongest evidence that we have was the fact that in the first round, the interior minister at the time had predicted the election results precisely. This is very, very odd that it would be. So the government has all the control of the resources, ID cards, registrations, publications, who comes in, who comes out. I mean, Turkey has come to a point where they were asking for a purple paint on your finger, like they did in Iraq, to prove that nobody votes multiple times, and the government would not go for it. So, but we can't prove it. And the opposition said, they conceded, they didn't argue against it. So there's not really much that we can talk about rigged elections. But opposition groups, the people, not the political parties, the people, the civil society organizations worked really hard to monitor the accuracy of this election. And that's what we see in the big cities. The vote is all in opposition parties. But in the smaller areas, Erdogan and his organization of AKP was able to control. And these are places that opposition groups have not been able to reach out as much and monitor the elections. So those change the balance, swing the vote. Because the new election system in the parliamentarian state laws as well has generated that where the opposition votes are high, they're minimized. Where the government's votes are high, the vote is maximized. Just like kind of like the electoral college in a way, where the vote in LA is a lot less worth than the vote in Wisconsin somewhere because of the heavy population. So very similar to that, they've changed. And frankly, when we were going into the election, not even we couldn't understand what the new electoral law was. So they've been working at it for years, the government, and they've been successful. And the opposition has not, for a variety of reasons.
Thank you so much. So you mentioned in your last point that we have to make assumptions properly. How can we change those assumptions? Like, how can we educate our leaders to do this?
Well, I think American government has seen Biden administration had a conference that invited democracies all around the world, and they did not invite Turkey. So I think that was an accurate step, but of course it's not sufficient because we have for a long time worked with different types of authoritarian regimes with the assumption that they are only harmful within their own country. They only do human rights violations and all that, but it's against their own people. So that's not the case anymore. I think we are seeing more and more that authoritarian regimes don't stay within their boundaries. One way or another, they are going to leap over to foreign affairs as well. So I don't know if it's education as much. I think the what's needed is the change in policy. And frankly, I don't see anytime soon that it would happen. I think everybody right now is conceded to the fact that Erdogan is going to be in charge for another 5 years. We need to make this work as well as we can.
So what exactly does this mean for the future of Turkey and U.S. relations with Turkey going forward?
Okay, so 2 parts, Stacey. The first part, I think in the fall, Turkey is expected to have a change in its constitution. It looks like in the summer, Erdogan is going to be rallying the powers, and he does need a supermajority vote in the parliament to get a constitutional change. This is something that they have been planning for a long time. So currently, Turkish constitution still says, for example, Turkey is a secular country. I am convinced that it probably is going to change. So if you and I met before Christmas, probably the new constitution will not say anymore Turkey is a secular country. Currently, LGBTQI is not banned in Turkey. I'm assuming that's going to change because there is very strong propaganda going on for the last plus years against LGBTQI groups. And for example, polygamy in law, it is forbidden. Again, Islamist groups are trying to change that. Age of consent right now is 18. If your parents allow, it could be 16. I'm assuming that's going to change as well, where they allow very young minors to be married, and the law will be okay with that. So I am expecting drastic changes in Turkish constitution in a couple of after summer, because there's a long summer break for the Turkish politics in the fall, starting September. I'm assuming there's going to be strong changes. Turkish economy is not doing well. I don't expect that to do very well. And Turkey also has a significant population of refugees from the Middle East. So they're holding Europe kind of hostage on that front. Erdogan is constantly threatening to open the gates and let the refugees flood into Europe. So Europe has to find a solution to that somehow. But whether or not Europe finds a solution, the population of Turkey is changing. As economy gets worse, people are much more reactive against refugees. And, social unrest, we don't hear it reported as frequently as it happens. So these are the domestic, hot points that we could expect trouble. With regards to foreign affairs, I think Biden administration is going to try their best to keep the status quo, to move along with Turkey and to help, to convince Turkey so that they would sign off on Sweden's membership for NATO, and probably not be as harsh against Kurds if possible, and go along with the policies against Iran. There has been some progress with Israel, which was very pleasant. Turkish government no longer does, the regular Israel bashing ceremonies every 2 weeks. So that's a bit of a relief. I'm hoping that this will continue. Now we see the planes from Tel Aviv coming into Turkey and vice versa, but we used to have a lot of tourism from Israel, so it seems to be going back to normal. So that's a positive relief. I'm hoping that it will continue because Turkey is trying to do peace with Gulf countries as well, particularly Saudi Arabia and UAE. So if that continues, I'm assuming Turkey will also, act nice with Israel as well.
Thank you so much. So before we got on this webinar, I was doing a little research and saw on your Twitter page that a student asked you if Turkey was a failed state, and you were a little taken back. Can you explain your response there?
Yes, if I remember correctly, many of the basic services Turkish state is struggling to provide because, again, of the economy. There's a lot of charges of corruption by the top elites, and these corruption charges have not really been ever handled. But the charges are very potent. Let me give you one basic example. We talked about the earthquake. Thousands of houses were demolished and people have lost their lives. But after the election, the survivors have been receiving utility bills for the homes that no longer work. So since February, apparently they've been running the clock. I don't know how they measured any water or gas or electricity because there is no building left. But the people that used to live in there are now getting the bills from February to June of the electricity or the water or any other utilities that they haven't used because there's no place to live to begin with. So this is the kind of, basic failed state result. Many of the services, when you want to get something done, is delayed. And unless you bribe somebody, really not much gets done anymore. That was not the case, 10, 15 years ago.
All right, thank you. Mira Yeager asks, do you think the relationship is improving due to the Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Israel working together on the gas pipelines?
Yes, I'm sure that does help. Turkey and Azerbaijan have a very close relationship on multiple levels. I can tell you that Turkish president during the last days of the election was campaigning with Aliyev, the Azeri president, and there's no language barrier, right? They speak the same language. So he was telling the press that, oh, I wanted to make Aliyev as one of the candidates in our election. So the relations are very close. And of course, I think that also helps with Israel. But I'm assuming the main reason Turkey is getting along with Israel, along with the gas pipe, is the fact that Turkey is trying to do good by GCC countries. They were already good with Qatar, but it's not enough because Turkey needs cash, what they call the hot money that's coming from not the West, where every dime and penny is accounted for, but it needs to come from places like Africa or Middle East or some Asian spots where the money is not monitored that well, because Turkey is in the gray list where there's significant amounts of money laundering is going, and they do need cash to hold the economy together. So they have to be on good terms with particularly Saudi Arabia. So I think that's another reason, because now Israel has made peace with all of these countries. Turkey can no longer risk, taking Israel on significantly. I mean, they will still make the here and there, Jerusalem is holy, this and that sort of comments, but I don't assume, anything big happening in the near future.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And before we go, can you please tell our viewers where we can find some of your work?
Yes, I was writing on Monitor for a long time, over a decade, but I did stop. One of the reasons I stopped was there's a lot of pressures, even on publications abroad. So they were having a hard time with the language that I use, I guess. So they were constantly editing me and softening my language. I was saying it's an authoritarian regime. They were saying we're moving away from democracy. So it became very challenging to read things that I haven't written. So I take a pause. I don't know when I'll be back or which outlet I will write for. Many of the outlets about Turkey is no longer publishing, really. We used to have another outlet, Ahval, and they're no longer publishing. So we'll see.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming out and speaking with us today. Unfortunately, we've come to the close of our webinar. Thank you again, Professor Tremblay, for joining us today.
Thank you, Stacy.
Of course. For our viewers, please join us Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern for a webinar with Ashley Perry. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.